Welcome to episode 29 of the International Web Effectiveness Podcast, where Bill Hunt and I, Bill Scully, focus on strategies and techniques necessary to improve your web presence and manage your global websites. In our last episode, we discussed how engaging digital teams is essential for overall marketing campaign effectiveness and what you can do with online research, SEO, and analytics. In this episode, we'll discuss the idea of an answers management program and strategy. Bill, developing an answers program. You wrote a couple articles about this. The first was about create a role you called the VP of Answers. I love this idea. Why don't you take us through that?
Yeah, this has been sort of my obsession for the past few weeks, this whole idea of answers management. So this original article was I had just come back from Japan, and I had two or three experiences where I had questions, and there was either a lack of answers or they were poorly answered. And so I said, hey, we need a VP of answers because people are asking questions and we're just not answering them. And so I said a VP of answers because I felt that it needed to be a senior enough role, similar to like the revenue managers and growth managers that you've talked a lot about, somebody that sits across multiple organizations, it's empowered by the C-suite to really solve this problem. And this problem is, are we answering the questions that people have? And I think this person needs to be, I made the argument of what they would do and why they needed to do it. And so that was that first one. You guys can go out and read it. And what was interesting, the second one was prompted by someone when I posted that on LinkedIn. A couple of people said, interesting idea. Interestingly enough, very little interest in this in the United States. But there was like 6 comments in Italy. There's a pretty interesting discussion about it in Italian. I had to use Translate to figure out what they were asking. And then finally, one person said, and then another, well, what's the strategy for doing this? So I created a second one of how you would, a framework for this. But let me define this because, I think we may need to reword it because it was a mouthful, to say this. So really an answer management program is, are we answering and are we the answer and an accurate answer for the very questions people are asking? And, I wrote a whole, third article trying to define it, but really that's what it is. Are we the answer no matter where people are asking? And it's interesting. We've got this division in search right now where, there's people that are like, Google's dead. Don't waste an ounce of time trying to optimize for Google. You got to be over in these answer engines. And the answer engine people are like, hey, a lot of this answer engine stuff is the same stuff we use for Google. And then we've got the whole debate now between, schema, does schema work here? Does schema not work here? I saw somebody post the other day. I just told my client to not only not do schema, but to rip it out because there's no value to it in the answer engines. And so I think there's a lot of chaos out there. And my hope is that we can just simplify this, come back to simplicity and ask the very basic question. When somebody asks a question, A, do we have an answer? Is it an accurate answer? And is it where people are asking? And there's 3 examples that I want to talk about really quickly. So what prompted the article, and I was on a train in Japan because there's a store, and it's now in the United States too, and a few other companies called Uniqlo. And they have amazing clothing. Some of it's sort of high tech. Like we went there for these shirts called Heat Tech, which are wicking and they're really inexpensive. And we wanted to buy them because the dollar to yen rate was amazing. They had a Christmas sale, which was amazing. And then they were on sale already, which was amazing. So, they're not quite free, but they were probably 20% of the regular price, giving our buying power. And so as I was looking at this, I'm like, which of these will fit me? Because, is a Japanese size and you hold it up and it's like, well, an extra large probably not going to fit, my massive body. But I will say that one of my proudest moments was being able to buy clothing in Japan after losing a little more than 100 pounds. So that was a big win. But the
Congrats.
real one came when I looked for socks. What is a Japanese size sock to, let's say, an American equivalent? And so all of these sizing issues, while I was there trying to think about it, there was more than a dozen people from everywhere from South Africa to Germany to the United States, France, asking these clerks, what is the size for this for German people or South African people? And so I said, why isn't there? Because about 90% of the people in the store at the time were foreigners. So why can't we have a QR code that I can scan and see this? Now, sizing, hey idiot, just take it into the try room and get the biggest one you can see and go try it on, see if it fits. Sure, I can do that. But like with the socks, what is a Japanese, whatever, 37 or something like that to an American size? So I thought, why isn't there, a QR code? Now, I thought, okay, I can go to the website. Well, it IP detected me that I was in Japan, took me to Japan, and now I've got Japanese sizes.
Hmm.
So unless I went to their customer service page where they did have an international size chart, then I could see, okay, an American size 12 is equal to this size in Japan. Then I started thinking, well, who would manage this chart, right? Is it Japan needs to manage a chart because they're selling primarily to Japanese, unless it's in this store in the major part of Tokyo with all the foreigners come in to buy stuff. Maybe they need a multi-country size chart. But it got thinking, what other things do people need information about? And so 2 or 3 times during the trip, I would ask questions about the hotels or about the restaurant, and there just wasn't any information about it because nobody thought, neither the people building the website nor the restaurant owners or the hotel people had this information.
Hmm.
And so I just thought that what if we did a better job? And I remember working on with Milestone Internet on their FAQ tool. And there used to be primarily hospitality, and it was very interesting the type of questions we were mining. And one was, do they have parking? Not only for them, but do they have parking near? I remember one we found that had a ton of queries that were helping them bring people to the hotel were parking near Miracle Mile in Chicago.
Yeah, I
So
mean, yeah, a hotel near a convention center,
exactly,
all that stuff.
near
Yeah,
the airport,
yeah.
we're seeing more
Lunch
of
near the
that.
convention center.
Anything like that.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So can we leverage these and because I think search co-opted this because of featured snippets. They
right.
wanted featured snippets, so they started digging into the toolbox and doing this. The second one, real quick, is when we get into the AI answer and search engines, AI overviews, however we want to refer to it. You and I were talking, I told you I needed to buy a new CO2 detector for travel because we were going to stay at these hotels, in Azerbaijan and that. And I feel comfortable when I have one because who knows what they're heating with. And so when I bought one and I just did it as a test, I asked, 4 of them, ChatGPT, I asked Perplexity, I asked Claude, and I think I might have asked Gemini or Google for their AI answers. What's the best CO2 detector for travel? And when you do that, you're letting that engine define best. And what was interesting watching Claude is it went out, I saw it basically write a protocol to go out and define best. Really quickly, it basically was creating the rule to go out and basically uncover or determine what is best. What was interesting is mine wasn't there. And in the article and the VP of answers, I have the output where it gave me 5 or 6 reasons why my model wasn't included. And the number one reason is we could not find information about your model in our repositories. Number two is we could not find, like one criteria was that it had a certification. We could not find any certifications. Then number three was we could not find anybody else talking about your model, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And each of these was At the end of the day, every single one of these said, you didn't have information we needed available to us to make this decision.
I
And so
mean, that's the
imagine
perfect
if,
exercise for everybody to go through.
exactly, right? So number one was I did the exercise of what do I do? If I were a CO detector company,
Yeah,
I would say, what's the best? I would do different iterations. And then if I'm not in the consideration set, or if I wasn't deemed the best, what about asking the question of why wasn't I in the consideration set?
yeah,
Why wasn't I the best?
yeah.
And that is very interesting what they come back with.
And
And
it
it
gives some insight as to how they're making decisions.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And I
and
think that's really interesting for companies. Now, who's going to do this? Is it the PR team? Is it the product team? Is it it's this new answers team
yeah,
that
yeah,
are doing this. And, there's tools that are getting close to be able to do some of this now, but the point we want to make is, are you even out there? Are you in the consideration set? And who is? Why are they there and you're not there? And can
yeah.
you capture these places they are and see if you can replicate that? The third example I want to give real quick, and then we'll talk about sort of the strategy, is so we have a timeshare, and I wanted to know what is the deadline to convert that week to Marriott points? Very simple question. What is the deadline to convert my timeshare week? And I put the name of the group, Vistana, to Marriott points.
Everybody has the same date.
No, actually, the AI result in Google came back and said it's from October 1st until March 31st.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really quick. Now, Google now is for things like this is giving you the little anchor link, right? And so I clicked on it and it showed it, and it was coming from AWS, Amazon Web Services. Like, why is it coming from AWS? And thought that was strange. And then I looked at the organic results, and there was a link from the company. The reason I went to Google is to get the link from Vistana. That information is gated. I would have to click, log in, figure out where the hell within the owner's manual and all that. So it's painful. But somehow they had allowed Google in. Google had a link to it. But when I went to the owner's manual, this very section that should have had it, this was one of the four ways that you can use your timeshare, wasn't in the answer.
Hmm.
So the first organic result. So when I went back to the AI result, it was actually a PDF from Vistana, which was a little bit older. And then there was a little like call out at the bottom that basically had that date. And then there was some exceptions that if you're a certain level member. But since then, since they published this document that they probably don't even know it's still out in the wild, it's this where they were hosting their PDF that was part of an old member guide.
Ah,
Google had found it.
yeah.
And then when I asked this question of other chatbots, it was pulling in things like there's wiki, not a like a Reddit forum, and there's another group for people with timeshares, and every single one of these had, as you said, expected different dates. So what do I do? Okay, I'm on their website. I'm not finding it. It's like I know it's got to be in one of these guides. I spent all this time looking through the guides. I went back to Google to try to find it. Couldn't find it. So I click chat and say, figure chatbot, answer, question, answer. Simple question, simple answer. Chatbot simply popped up the link to the very page that I had been on that didn't answer my question. Because again, somebody thought that user guide would answer my question. It didn't. So I click you can't get any other help because it's a binary ask question, get answer. And then of course it comes up, did we delight you with our answer? It's like, no. So then I have two more choices. I can call them, but as a person who hates using the phone, I didn't want to call them. So the other option was send an email, wait 48 hours for an answer. And they basically tell me the answer is in the guide, the very guide that doesn't have the answer, that I just told them in the email doesn't have the answer. And so they did answer it. And it's actually August 31st. So different than anything out
Completely
on the web,
different. Yeah, yeah,
completely
yeah.
different. right?
That's a really good point. I had never thought of actually checking AI answers, but your answers could be wrong in AI.
Well, there's a new study that was just out. I don't know who did it, but was talking about that whole thing, that the amount of hallucinations and wrong errors. They could be wrong because of outdated data or where
Yeah,
they got them from. And that circles back to this whole, are you controlling
right.
your answers? Because if you're leaving that to someone else, then what may be presented may not be the best answer for your company.
Before we get into your strategy discussion, I actually, well, I don't know. Have you ever heard the book They Ask You Answer by Marcus Sheridan?
No, I haven't.
So he's the guy, you might have seen him at a conference. He's the guy that did the fiberglass pools.
Okay.
Do you know him?
Yeah.
He's written a couple books, but one book is They Ask You Answer. And I actually went to a workshop because I thought the concept was brilliant. Like, this was before COVID, so maybe 5 years ago. It was really difficult to come up with good content ideas. So he basically said you can break this down into questions about cost, problems, versus reviews, and like best how to what is. So example, you could whip out 100 article titles. What's the difference between X and Y? That could be your model, could be your brand, could be competitor. What are the specifications for? What are the problems with? How much does X cost? Like, everybody's scared to death to put their
Price.
the
Yeah.
price of something on the web. It's between $1 and $100 million. I mean,
Right.
put a cost. If someone asks the question, you're going to be the answer. How to install X, and then like top things. And I don't remember exactly who wrote this, but he was doing some research on top SEO companies, and like simple bullet lists were being pulled into the AI overviews and coming up as the answer. So you could definitely game that stuff as long as you list all your competitors, but put your name at the top there.
So it's a lot of things. I mean, that's it, right? Let's start with the simple thing, right? What if you had to action this? Number one is make a list of the questions people are asking,
Mm-hmm.
exactly as you just outlined, right? Who, what, where, when, why, A versus B. It was interesting in my PubCon keynote, I gave an example of an HP calculator. And in the AI overview answer for that, it had two columns. It was like pros and cons, and a brand is never going to put cons ever on their
Right.
website, right? So that means somebody else is going to answer the cons, right?
Yep.
And that's exactly what it was, is that the cons were some really bad ones because it believed, its logic said these are the bad things about this
Yeah.
product.
There's one website
Price was number one.
There's one website in the world that has a list of cons about your product, so that's the answer.
Exactly. And that's the answer. And that's who they pulled in, as the counterpoint to pros. And so some of these things, again, you're not going to list, our product is great, column A, and our column B is this is why our product sucks. But you can potentially control the narrative on some of those, like even something as, criticisms of whatever it is, you've
Yeah.
got to feel comfortable, but start with that list. And the search people know where to get this. I mean, there's a multitude of tools that scrape, people also ask, there's Answer the Public. And so these are what we're asking there. But the one gold mine that I've been trying to get people to use for, God, probably 25 years is site search.
Yeah.
These are people who came to your website and have specifically asked questions related to you, trying to find an answer because why? Maybe they can't find it easily on your crazy website.
Yeah. Nope.
But
Nobody uses site search unless it's a last resort. It's like
exactly.
I cannot find what I'm looking for. Do a search.
And so, so start with that list of questions, wherever you get them from. My daughter, it was an interesting transition for my daughter. She was working at Babies R Us, and her job was a social media manager of, all kinds of goodness around babies. That the stores in the region were having these parties, and here's this about baby care. So it was a really easy job. I mean, there's no shortage of information. Then she got hired by a big insurance company. So she went from free form, as long as it's got something to do with babies, have at it, to anything that's posted was regulated, had to be approved by legal, et cetera, et cetera. Even though she had like this 20 post a week mandate. And it's like, well, where am I going to get these? And so she started posting things like it's National Fire Prevention Week, because that's safe.
Yeah.
Legal is like, she went through a calendar and found all of these insurance or, hazard related days. Okay, it's, March 27th, NOAA puts out the hurricane calendar day,
Yeah.
and then one day she happened to ask the question, well, who gets to answer people's questions without having to run to legal and get an answer? And they're like, well, customer service has a list of vetted questions and vetted answers. So she went to customer service, can I get your table of questions and answers? And then she bounced that over to legal. What of these if I see this question, can I post an answer with an 800 number or whatever? So she got another set, and she just kept building this from going around the organization, finding out what's been pre-approved, or can I, here's my next 3 months of questions to get approved.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting when you find that some people already have these lists. Customer service. The other big one that can be a gold mine is, and it's funny how much of this is in a vacuum, all these chat agents that people have on their website. Every company that I've ever worked with since these started coming to be were these like skunkworks projects where nobody ever asked anybody else. They just spent gazillions of dollars paying these companies to come up with questions and answers. One company was pretty creative. They were taking the recordings and they mined it for the questions people were asking. And then what did the agent say? And so, so they were, spending money to do this. And so, let's find that database, because it literally it's a binary database of question and answer. And let's pull that in. And let's create a database that's got question and answer or answers, and tag it based on what's the source and what product is it related to, what solution is. And if you just start to think about this, so step number one is gathering this. Number two is cataloging it, getting somebody to approve it and is it been approved or does it have conditional approving? And then guess what? Now we can take that list of questions and we can put it into even a simple rank checking tool or any of these, AI overview tools, and see, is there an answer? A, is there an answer? And B, is there an answer from us? And so that's the second step of tagging it, whether or not you have an answer in the wild, in the different places people are going to ask. And what's nice, like we've talked about with, centralized asset management, centralized content management, centralized answer management means the same data set that the customer service team pulls from, they can pull from this.
Yeah.
Because it's been vetted, right?
Yeah.
And only the vetted answers will show.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is, you really have to be a big thinker, but I think you can easily make the business case why companies need to act now. The impact of AI-driven search on traffic and customer engagement. I mean, if your answer is there, it's right. And then hopefully, more people will get links back to the origin of the content. Brands are getting pressured to show up in these AI generated answers. This is an easy way to start to do that.
Yep.
So how would you go about building the foundation? I want to remind people of our free Facebook group, where we use that as an opportunity to discuss these things, and you can ask any questions you want. You could also suggest ideas for upcoming podcasts. You can find that by searching International Web Mastery Free Group.
So in the article, the first thing that I started with that we always recommend people do is really, it's a twofold thing. One is we've got to build the desire to want to make sure we're the answer for these questions. So exactly as you just said, if you've got people going out and wanting to know, why didn't I show up in these answers, or whatever trigger that is. And, again, God forbid it's your CEO, because, CEO should never talk about SEO, and let alone trying to rank for keywords. For those that didn't know what that is, that's an internal discussion we've been having based on some LinkedIn posts. But so what I said is, first, people got to appreciate that. And I gave an example of, really, sorry, I brought up the wrong one. I wanted to read. I came up with, 4 ways to build this business case. And it's really um, customer experience. So remember, most people are focused on either saving money or making money, right? So the two sides of that equation are customer experience enhancement. Can we reduce the number of questions that are coming into call centers?
Right.
Like the time that agent had to spend to answer my silly question about what's the deadline for converting this week, they could have answered somebody else's more complex question
Mm-hmm.
if the web would have answered it for me. So using them, and a lot of companies are introducing these core programs, which are customer-oriented results and experience on excellence, meaning they're trying to offload call center into things like chatbots in the web. Answer engine visibility gap analysis. Are we there or not? So that simple equation. And Pete Blackshaw, who I think coined the phrase, this idea of answer engines or answer economy, that in his argument is big brands are all campaign focused and, sort of awareness focused and, are so detached from answering people's questions that they're the ones that are really at a disadvantage. So you can create that gap analysis to say, hey, we're not there 90% of the time. And I have a great case study that I linked to. Second is traffic and revenue impact. So one of the key things that SEOs struggle with this is the fact that search engines, and Google specifically, has been disintermediating sort of the search engine or the SEO's goal of driving traffic to the website. Because that simple question of what's the deadline to convert, if I saw that it was a date that I felt was believable, did I need to go to
Right.
Vistana's website? No. If I want to know what time it is in New Delhi, India, do I need to go to, timeandtemp.com? No.
Yeah.
So this is the argument that we have with they're stealing our content, but can I create these answers in a way, if they're extracted from me, that encourages someone potentially to come to my website to learn more?
Well, and
Um,
and think about the unintended consequences of the wrong date. Like,
exactly.
if you just assumed the date was right and you went to go change it, before the last day and the time had passed, you would be pissed.
Right.
I would blame the company for the wrong answer in the
Right.
AI generated overview.
Right. So I have an article that I'm going to post. This is an interesting segue into that about, do we need authenticated search results? And exactly this point you made, like one of these, I can't tell you how many business owners I've talked to where one or more of their employees have been ripped off, especially in Amsterdam. Now, I'm not, dishing on Amsterdam or that airline, but this is especially where I've heard it on people flying Delta. They land in Amsterdam, their flight is delayed. They do a Google query for Delta customer service, and a phone number shows up. And they call that number, and it sounds like it's the airline customer service rep. And what it is it's a scam. They say, yep, we've rebooked you, but that's going to be $600. Give us your credit card. They rebook them. Well, they say they rebooked them. And yeah, go to your gate, and your ticket will be there. And so they're already in the airport. So they go to the gate. They're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I made the flight. I can get to my destination. And they go there, and it's like, what do you mean? You don't have a ticket. And it turned out that they called a scam call center because that call center was what was ranking
Wow.
for that number. So like in the UK, there are companies that are actually legit that are showing up because now to enter the UK for Americans and many other people, we need to get the pre-clearance, and it's like, oh, $10, I think, right? So you can do that for free if you go to the UK government website. But the what's ranking above the UK government in multiple paid ads are companies that will help you do this for a fee. So instead of
So,
it being $10, it might be $25. And
or
essentially what they're
250
doing,
bucks.
or $250,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
It's just whatever. And you don't know what that is until, and in this article, I write about this. You don't know what that is until, because you have to click, you fill in all your information. It's got the similar logo to what the UK government has. So you think you're on a legit government site and you click it, you've given them all your information, and which could be exploited. But again, these are proper companies that are helping you do this. And then, they then will basically submit this on your behalf for an additional fee for them doing it for you. And so a lot of people are complaining. It's like, I thought it was $10. And, at the point that you find out that it's X and you don't bail out and try to find, but there's two parts to this equation. Why doesn't the government do better
Yeah.
at making it known that they're the official site? And two, why doesn't, search engines, and it's just not a Google thing, and I've had this rant before on visa services and stuff like that, where, this gets into that whole, your money, your life, and that
Yeah.
some of these we need to have a vetted, meaning this is the US government, this is the British government site. Anyways, but who is the right answer? And we see this whenever there's revenue potential, there's a lot of people in here. And so that's really what it is use whatever you need to do. And the last point I had was the competitive differentiation, which is a fancy way of saying, hey, our key competitor is doing this. They appear to have an answers program and we don't, and they're, kicking our butts in answering these questions. We need to do so. So, whatever method you do to get people to want to participate, the second step is we always advocate build a team, get all of the
Yeah.
stakeholders together, because this is not an SEO thing, this is not a PR thing, this is not a web content thing, it's an everyone's thing,
Yeah.
because they may present the content, but they in no way are the person that should be answering these questions. And we need a mechanism for how are we going to do this? If we start answering all these questions, how are we going to get them on the website? How are we going to get them wherever they need to be? I foresee a point in time where a lot of this is going to be a feed. I think we're 6 months to a year away to where, just like Bing is doing with Index now, we should be able to submit vetted answers, just like we do with product feeds.
Yeah.
Right, we're vetting all this information, price and availability, and a dozen variables on price, and feeding it in to these e-commerce engines. So get the team together, get buy-in, plead the case, help them understand their role in it, try to get an executive sponsor, and then the fun begins of identifying a pilot case, whether it's a single product, a couple different challenges to start your discovery. What are the questions? Prioritize the questions. Exactly, if people go back, rewind, and listen to sort of the hierarchical list that you gave, who, what, where, and why, when, whatever, mining it from different things, but just start with 5 or 10, and play with it. And while you're doing this, think about, how do the repositories ingest this for AI tools? Where are they getting from? There's been some recent studies saying that a lot of times it's the top answers in the Google search results.
Yeah. They're being
And
scraped.
that's
Yeah.
is being scraped. Um, or they're using the similar weighting mechanism in their data set as Google. As part of this, you want to create a series of guides like brand voice, consistency, content compliance. The example I talked about with socks. The size chart for socks, there was 7 disclaimers under the size chart, which was insane. It
For,
was like, every sock is going to be different. Every picture is going to be different. Socks of different material may be different. It was 7 disclaimers for socks.
Yeah, that's just crazy. That's like, not guaranteeing your work. Like, how many people are not going to be satisfied with your work?
Yeah.
Like, so does, so the sock doesn't fit the guy with the wide foot. Well, he should know better. And how many people does that happen to?
Well, I mean, we could do a whole funny episode on like the lawsuit that was here in Connecticut with the company that I guess they replaced snow tires or whatever, failed to secure the lug nuts. And apparently in the protocol for replacing snow tires, was there a requirement to replace lug nuts, let alone make them secure, even though they told the person to come back in 24 hours and make sure that they're secure.
That was the legal argument?
It was a legal argument that
they
were being sued for
you
the
asked us to
damage.
replace snow tires and we don't have the obligation to put on lug nuts?
Exactly.
Holy miracle.
That was what they were arguing, is that nowhere in our manual of doing this do we have an obligation to A, replace the lug nuts, and B, make sure that they're tight. And ended up getting tossed out. Well, of course you have an obligation, especially since you told them to come back. And that's how they ended up, they failed to come back to do that. So again, it's, your point, people should have enough sense. A, let's tighten them, and B, either if you're not going to retighten them yourself, then to come back and get them tightened. Anyways, KPIs.
Let me ask you one last question here to wrap up this. So what would be a good, I'm going to use the word persona, like who would make a good VP of Answers?
I'm glad you asked. First off, it's somebody within the company. The best VP of Answers is somebody who's got deep institutional knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
They know what you do. It could be somebody that was a category manager. So maybe they manage multiple categories of products, so they're familiar with the nuances of them. I think that was one of the criteria of like who makes the best VP of Answers. Number 2 was somebody that's a team player that can make solid arguments to different constituencies to get them to do things. Somebody that's organized. Somebody that, can manage a process like this to say, we need to do this, 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 and this. Mm-hmm. And then I think lastly, somebody that's diligent and that can communicate the process and keep it fresh and, sort of future proof, that's fundamentally curious. So those were what I put in as is who this sort of perfect person is for this type of role.
Okay, great. I think this is a good place to wrap. Any final words?
Nope. Just start with something. Just find what's missing out in the wild. Try to understand why you're missing it and close that gap, and then showcase what was the goodness that came from that. Whether it's, fewer customer service calls or revenue or incremental traffic, find the business case and go from there.
Good. So next week, well, actually, by the time you hear this, hopefully we'll get this out before, but we'll actually both be in New York at Google. So if you're listening and you want to say hi, we'd really appreciate that. And we hope you find value in our conversations. If you're enjoying the show, we'd really appreciate it if you take a moment to rate and review the podcast. We also want to hear from you. Your feedback helps motivate us and keeps us making these and plan future episodes to match what matters for you. You can join us on our Facebook group. We have a free Facebook group, and we have a paid Facebook group that's available to the people who've paid for our trainings. You can follow International Web Mastery on LinkedIn, Facebook, and X, and we hope you like and comment. I think that's it. That's a wrap.
Yep. See you next time.
Thanks, Bill. Hey, this is Bill Scully. I just wanted to let you know that we have a free training course called Demystifying hreflang. It includes 6 modules and is over an hour long with a quiz at the end of each module. You can find it at internationalwebmastery.com. Hope to see you there.